All right, howdy folks. I'm going to give you a rundown on 0 points. 0 points are a lot of stuff. So I'm going to kind of explain stalls and pendulums and eventually get into plane breaks and plane bending, strangely enough, with stalls. Okay, so we'll start, we'll cover pendulums and then we'll cover stalls, up, down, horizontal in both directions, even diagonal. Diagonal. So we'll cover a lot. We'll eventually get to point isolation things. We'll almost get to those immediately. We'll get into the float stalls like that. And then those float stalls are what will get us into our plane bending. And why is that related? Well, you'll see. So what we're going to do is define 0 point. I have a handy list here to go over. We'll define the 0 point. And a 0 point is a point where there's zero momentum or velocity or whatever. It's where the poi is floating. The point in space where the poi is floating. And in my mind, what I always think of is the swing set. When you're at the very top of the swing, how you can kind of pull on the chain and float for a second before you hit back into your chair, the seat, whatever. That. Or the point where it changes direction in a pendulum, right? It's floating, change, floating, change, floating, change. So one of the things about 0 points is they change direction. A 0 point, generally it'll change direction. You can get to a 0 point and have it continue in a similar direction or the same direction with a point isolation. Okay, but the point isolation, let's go back to pendulums real quick. You got your pendulum. The observation we want to make is that at that 0 point, it changes direction, right? And direction doesn't just mean reversal, or it goes in the opposite direction. While it's floating there, if you move your hand, if you move your center of rotation, then you will have a new direction, right? Now it's at a diagonal. Now I've got it, so it's changed 90 degrees. Now we're back, right? So that 0 point, you can use it by moving the center of rotation 1 unit's length. You isolate the head by moving the center of rotation 1 unit's length, which is the length of your poi. So my hand will stay just far enough away to keep the tether straight, right? You can kind of cheat it, but you'll get some wonk if you do that. So just get used to moving your hand 1 unit length around the poi, right? And so a good drill for that, we'll get our pendulum going. And when the poi's at its 0 point on either side, we move our hand 1 unit length to where it's directly above the poi. That'll cause this poi to freeze right here. And if the poi freezes in a really nice, the less bounce, that indicates a more accurate 1 unit length movement. Because if you end up cheating it and kind of go, you'll get some wob. And so this is a good drill. It gives you some feedback onto whether you're doing it clean or if you're not. See? So that's your first kind of drill to get used to the 1 unit length thing. And once you're comfortable with that, you can do the point isolation pendulum. So you're doing a pendulum over here on one side of you. When it reaches this point here, move your hand 1 unit length 180 degrees, boom, around the head, and you'll get to a new pendulum, like that. So that's called the point isolation. Kind of an interesting thing just visually, especially on fire. You can turn it into a move by it's like 2 pendulums at once, and one of them will just scoop over while the other one pendulums, like that. This is a random thing. I didn't plan on throwing this in there, but it's cool. So now, the one that's pendulum, point isolate. Do the point isolation with it, right? And so it has this cool floating illusion. So that's something you can do with point isolation. It's not just theory now. You can do something with it. Excuse me. All right. So we got through point isolation. We've got through unit length and this whole thing. So 90 degrees. Okay. So now we'll talk about stalls properly, right? So we know we have a unit length, and we've talked about moving our center of rotation. we know that if we move our center of rotation the 1 unit length towards the poi, we're also using it 1 unit length up. So we stop the poi straight in its tracks. But if we use 1 unit length towards the poi and we don't lift our hand, the poi will move 1 unit length 90 degrees from the straight line we're making with our hand. Like that. You can also do it. So this depends on the direction we're spinning. The poi will move in spin 90 degrees from where our hand ends up. 1 unit length from my center of rotation, where it is currently. 1 unit length would be where my finger is now. I'll move my hand there in a straight line when the poi head gets there. Dead stop, right? So now, what if my poi was spinning the other direction? We'll do the same thing. Move my hand 1 unit length towards the poi's head when it's 90 degrees from where I want it to stall. So I just kind of let it flop to let you see that that's where my hand goes at that moment, right? Now. If I was to take my hand when the poi is frozen here at the 0 point and I pull my hand back to where it started in a straight line, the inverse will happen, the reverse will happen, and so I'll end up getting this. Or now that I'm spinning this way, we can demonstrate downward, up, down. So, I mean, it works the same. So here on the inside, ooh. And also, so I'm going to bring my hand in so that I can move it that way, 1 unit length when the poi head gets here, here, here. It works on the outside too. A little slow. So, ooh, same thing here. I can move my hand out 1 unit length. So now we have, that's just up and down, right? I just only demonstrated doing it up and down. We can combine to get, oh shit, these different patterns. You know, a lot of these are familiar. You've seen these all at one time or another. And if my hands are together, 1 unit length out, my hands are together. So you can also do all this stuff horizontally, right? So if I want my poi to go outward, I will stop my hands here. I will move, so I'll start here, move my hands 1 unit length up, 90 degrees. Then we'll go like this. Like that. And the same thing coming in. It works exactly the same, you know, on the bottom, on the top. And so you can come up with any number of, you know, combinations of things to do there, like stall, pendulum, back, stall, pendulum, back. Whatever you want, mix and match. So you can also do these diagonally, right? So if I want my poi to stall here, then my hand is here, move diagonally 90 degrees from where my hand goes, the poi will go in spin, right? If it's going the other way, it'll go like that. So if you want a bigger stall, you know, rather than just being stuck with this 1 unit length area, you can kind of extend them. And you can, something that helps for the bigger ones is just think of it like you're going to throw your poi. And do the same thing, throw it, move your hand the unit length to get into the same line that the poi is moving now. And once your hand's there, it has to follow the poi. And then you pull it back, right? So for a big one, you'd like throw it and pull it back. Throw it and pull it back. Same thing, throw it forward and pull it back. Or throw it up and pull it back. or from way up high, drop it down and pull it back, you know. So it's all the same stuff applies, but you're just doing it bigger, you know. Oh, hit the chair. I can't come up with a good example for that one. So taking that throw it idea into account, imagine if you're doing pendulums and you threw it upward and followed the poi with your hand, right? So I'm basically just doing a stall. The poi is going to a 0 point, but I've thrown it so that the 0 point is going to be much, much higher. And then I bring my hand up so that it doesn't get all wonky and finish the orbit or anything. If I throw it and don't bring my hand up, you get this. You know, so you're throwing it up and floating it next to your hand. Really, there's only 2 of these because you're exploiting gravity a lot. So there's like the one in front and the one behind. You can kind of cheat a horizontal one by doing that point isolation from before this guy, but with some momentum. See, it's like not really the same thing, but it kind of looks like it. But those are cool. So with pendulums, you can extend it like this. And the same thing, it's just a 0 point there. So imagine a linear version of that. So these are your floats. Float is a 0 point. Right? You're just manipulating where it happens by adjusting your hand's position relative to the head at an interesting timing, right? So with these, remember how we were doing in the very beginning of this rant, the pendulums, and you could change your plane with them when they're at that 0 point. With these floats, you're stretching that 0 point out very, very far, right? So you could start rotating your hand around it in that point isolation fashion, way down here. And so when you come back and you've moved your hand 90 degrees, you're up here. Or going downward, it exaggerates it the same amount, right? It exaggerates it so much that it gives you a little bit of time between where you initiate the movement and then when that plane change finishes. It gives you enough time that you can start thinking about it and add some momentum, right? So then you get a plane bend. Float it up, rotate your hand, give it that momentum. Or float it down, rotate your hand. The momentum's easy on that one because gravity, you know. Float it up, rotate your hand, add momentum. Float it down in gravity. But now you're plane bending. That's how plane bends work. It's just a point isolation around a float. You can make the floats really small so that you can't even tell they're there, but that's what you're doing. And now that, since we're not going to try to stall it like this, you know, this is the one we could fake, right? Until that becomes pretty obvious. You just plane bend like that. But the top one, since we don't worry about stalling, that means you can plane bend with that real easily. That's a really easy bend. Wimp. So start linking these together. Start bending, just like how we were stalling horizontally. You can start bending horizontally. Bending vertically, bend horizontal this way. It opens up a crazy new world. You can bend all over the place, just like you can stall all over the place. There's no, if you want to stall here at a diagonal, then now we know that from here, 1 unit length, so that's where I have to have my hand. I can come up with where I want to stall and reverse engineer how to do it. You know, you could literally figure out how to stall anywhere. I mean, it doesn't look that great, but you can do that now. So yeah, now you know about 0 points from pendulums. You know how to point isolate. You know how to do little short, quick stalls. You know how to extend those stalls. You know how to float them. You know how to turn those floats into plane bends. And I didn't really touch on braking, so good thing for the review. The idea with plane braking is real similar to the bend thing. If I stall horizontally, then I can pull my poi into a horizontal plane or a vertical one. From any stall point, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 ways, you know, or upward 1, 2, 3, 4, or from downward 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 ways that you could pull the poi from that 0 point back into your spinning to get a lot of different patterns. You could change them each time. You could stall one, let the other one pendulum, let the other one bend. Ooh. You could maintain consistent timings and repeat these patterns, or you could just make weird flower version variation things. You can break all over the place however you want. So that becomes really fun, and that's pretty much all stalls. I'm stalling every quarter right now. So that's the idea of breaks, and you can turn that same concept into bends with that float point isolation thing that we were talking about earlier. All right, have fun.